Hello students, I'm Siraj Khan, lecturer in English Cast. Welcome to my subject Literary Criticism 2. Our subject code is English 332. T.S. Eliot as a critic. This is our lecture number 11. Who is a critic? A person who judges the merits of literary works, especially one who does so professionally. Critics are publicly accepted and to a significant degree followed because of the quality of their assessments or their reputation. Critics are the people who evaluate a piece of writing on basis of merits and do so to bring positive changes. They try to highlight different aspects of writer's piece of writing. T.S. Eliot is one of the greatest literary critics of England from the point of view of his critical writings. His 500 essays occasionally published as reviews and articles had a far-reaching influence on literary criticism in the country. His criticism was revolutionary, which inverted the critical tradition of the whole English-speaking work. The outlines for, as John Howard says, that I cannot think of a critic who has been more widely read and discussed in his own lifetime, and not only in English but in almost every language except Russian. These are his views about T.S. Eliot. The outlines, poet's biography, his important literary works, his critical works, the metaphysical poets, metaphysical conceit, his defense of metaphysical poets, a dissociation of sensibility, and defects as a critic. Before this, we got a separate lecture on the introduction of T.S. Eliot. He was born in 1888 and died in 1965. He was American-born British poet, dramatist, essayist, publisher, editor, and critic. He won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1948. He was a modern poet and critic, as one of the most important work tradition and individual talent, and his objective criticism. Eliot devised numerous critical concepts that gained wide popularity and has a broad influence on criticism. For example, his objective correlative, dissociation of sensibility, unification of sensibility are few of Eliot's works hotly debated by critics. His comments on the nature of poetic drama and the relation between poetry and drama have done much to bring about a revival of poetic drama in the modern age. Even if he had written no poetry, he would have made his mark as a distinguished and subtle, shrewd critic. Important literary works, poems, The Love Song of Jalbert Prufrock, The Wasteland, 4 quartets, poetic drama, Murder in the Cathedral, The Cocktail Party, Elder Statesman, and The Family Reunion, and the confidential clerk. Eliot's views on the nature of poetic process are equally revolutionary. According to him, poetry is not inspiration, it is organization. The poet's mind is like a vessel in which are stored numerous feelings, emotions, and experiences. The poetic process fuses these distinct experiences and emotions into new wholes. In his most famous critical essay, Tradition and the Individual Talent, Eliot argues that art must be understood not in a vacuum but in the context of previous pieces of art. Eliot himself implied this concept on many of his works, especially on his long poem, The Waste Land. His critical works, as Eliot's critical essays, fall into two categories: on the nature and function of criticism first, and the second on authors and their works. His important essays, Tradition and Individual Talent, an official critical manifesto where he viewed about the nature of poetic process in the process of learning and understanding art, poetry and drama, function of criticism, and the English metaphysical poets, the frontiers of criticism. Eliot's views on criticism. As a critic, Eliot has his faults. Often his criticism is spoiled by personal and religious prejudices, blocking an honest and impartial estimate. Moreover, he does not judge on by the same standards. With the passing of time, his critical faculties were increasingly exercised on social problems. Critics have also found fault with his style is too full of doubts, reservations, and qualifications. He openly declared himself as a classicist in literature, a royalist in politics, and Anglo-Catholic in religion. His notions on religion, politics, and literature are indistinguishable. Lifelong commitment to criticism, and his critical works changed the course of English literary history. And criticism should be objective, not subjective. Critic has a role to review the past of literature and set the poets and poems in order. His views on the metaphysical poets, that they made the renewal of interest in metaphysical poetry, which was neglected for a long time, argues metaphysical poetry to be the continuation of a great tradition, and his contradicts Dr. Johnson's assumptions is the heterogeneous ideas yoked by violence together. Metaphysical poets failed to unite dissimilar ideas into a single whole. Too much analysis and dissection of particular emotional situations, inventive use of conceits, nature and art ransacked for illustrations. The metaphysical conceit is a comparison becomes a conceit when we are made to concede likeness while being strongly conscious of unlikeness. Helen Gardner says, John Donne's valediction forbidding mourning a couple paced with absence from each other is likened to a compass. Donne's The Flea is flea's blood sucking to convince possible, and lover to join him in physical sexual union. Eliot's defense of metaphysical poets is he defended the metaphysical poets, compelling heterogeneous ideas into unity by operation of poet's mind is universal in poetry. is more like the theory of the objective correlative is one of the most important critical concepts of T.S. Eliot. It exerted a tremendous influence on the critical temper of 20th century. In the concept of the objective correlative, Eliot's doctrine of poetic impersonality finds its most classic formation, as he defines objective correlative as a set of objects, a situation, a chain of events which shall be the formula for the poet's emotion, so that when the external facts are given, the emotion is at once evoked. As he explained that the poet cannot communicate his emotions directly to the readers, he has to find some object suggestive of it, and only then he can evoke the same emotion in his readers. So this theory is a set of objects, a situation, a chain of events which shall be the formula of that particular emotion, such that when the external facts which must terminate in sensory experience are given, the emotion is immediately evoked. And this is the concept of unification of sensibility, as he in defense of metaphysical poets. In great Elizabethans and early Jacobeans possessed or developed unified sensibility. Sensibility is a syntactic faculty which can amalgamate thought and feeling. Metaphysical poets possessed this faculty and were able to fuse dissimilar ideas into a single whole. Dissociation of sensibility. Poets in the 18th and 19th centuries lacked unification of sensibility. The dissociation of sensibility set in. 18th century poets, intellectuals, they thought but did not feel. Romantic poets felt but did not think. Victorian poets meditate poetically but cannot express it. And 20th century modern poets, similar to metaphysical poets, uses conceits bound to be difficult. Like Aristotle, Eliot is of the opinion that it is not the business of the poet to say but to show, not to present but to represent. In other words, Eliot's concept of the objective correlative is based on the notion that it is not the business of the poet to present his emotions directly, but rather to represent them indirectly through the objective correlative, which become the formula of the poet's original emotions. And this is one of the reasons that he admired metaphysical poets, especially Dante's poetry, is that Dante's was a visual imagination, and because he attempted to make us see what he saw, because he did not lose his grasp over the objective correlative. And if writers or poets or playwrights want to create an emotional reaction in the audience, they must find a combination of images, objects, or description evoking the appropriate emotion. The source of the emotional reaction isn't in one particular object, one particular image, or one particular word. Instead, the emotion originates in the combination of these phenomena when they appear together. Theory of impersonality is stated in tradition and individual talent, rejected romantic subjectivist theory of poetic imagination, and the Wordsworth's philosophy of spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings is two aspects of impersonal theory: matter of tradition and creative process. Sense of tradition is originality of a poet, not in inventing anything new or differing from his predecessors. Great European tradition flowing from Homer, Shakespeare, and Dante to modern times, and a poet should look at the past in the future. Poet should permit this great tradition to assert itself on his poem. Poem should be a recreation and a development of what his predecessors have created. Negative impact is the distrust novelty, the originality, and discourages individual attempts. Positive impact of traditional sense. Poets should have a sense of the history of poetry, awareness of the presentness of the past. Poet surrenders his personality to the superior authority of tradition, literature, not self-expression but self-surrender progress of an artist, a continued extension of personality. Poet's mind open to all sorts of sensations and thoughts, receptacle of different feelings, and combined and fused into a new whole by the creative mind, and refutes Wordsworth's definition: poetry is a spontaneous overflow of powerful feelings. Catalysis is example to demonstrate the relationship between process of depersonalization and tradition, as platinum is a catalyst for converting sulfur and CO2 into sulfurous acid. No change happens to the catalyst, and mind of the poet as a catalyst, and emotions and feelings sulfur and CO2. Artist's mind keeps forming new compounds. He remains separate in the whole process of creation. Personality of the poet has nothing to do with his poetry. Rejects Wordsworth's theory of emotions recollected in tranquility. Poetry not a turning loose of emotion, but an escape from emotion, he believed. Not an expression of personality, but an escape from personality. Objective correlative, as we already explained from the essay Hamlet and his problems, the only way of expressing emotion in the form of art is objective correlative, a set of objects, a situation, a chain of events which shall be the formula of that particular emotion. Emotional reaction doesn't get stimulated from one particular object, image, or word. It originates in the combination of these when they appear together. Preference for spoken language. Poetry should approximate to the spoken language during the poet's lifetime, not in favor of colloquialisms. Admires Dante's language, the language that Dante used in the metaphysical poetry, advocates prosaic style in poetry, and he rejects poetic style in prose. T.S. Eliot has some defects as a critic, like religious attitude in critical pronouncements and personal and religious prejudice. He carried. A take of Milton and Schiller exposes his lack of objectivity, as he believed that the poet should be objective, and elements of didacticism. Eliot's critical tenets, invaluable aids to understanding and appreciation of poetry. In objectivity and scientific attitude, Eliot resembles Aristotle. New criticism greatly indebted to T.S. Eliot. Thank you very much and good luck.